Marge Be Not Proud is one of the most sitcom-y and sentimental episodes in the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons. It is so charming and earnest, it feels like something that came out of seasons 1 or 2. In fact, when I was younger, I always thought this was like a season 3 episode. When I got that episode guide, I was shocked it was toward the back of the book. But there is such a thing as too much schmaltz crammed into one Simpsons episode. What really separates Marge Be Not Proud from their morality-peddling peers of TGIF shows and very special episodes? Do we just give this one a pass because it's Christmas? Or is The Simpsons elevating a very traditional concept? Now, to be fair, as sweet as Marge Be Not Proud is, the general environment of the episode is anything but. This is, after all, a Bart episode, and he is going to provide a baseline of mischief and smartass backtalk. Look at him telling his parents to buy him that video game, how he tells Marge to her face how lame she is. We'll fight it out with Milhouse over a cup and ball. The world isn't much friendlier either. This is a world of tiresome privileged families like Gavin and his mom, how the Try and Save proudly remains open on the holidays. Then you have Don Brodka, who is one of the least warm and fuzzy Simpsons characters ever. All the Marge stuff is incredibly wholesome, even by Marge standards, so I think some of these harsher elements are a key balancing tool for the story. I don't think this episode works if Don Brodka isn't the way he is, such a threatening, no-nonsense presence. He is so no-nonsense that he can ruin their family picture, and oops, sucks for you guys. Actually, I always kind of wondered why Try and Save was able to screw the Simpsons on the photo. Forget it, Marge, it's Try and Save. Getting Lawrence Tierney to play Don Brodka is just god-tier casting. He is so good in this role. This super gruff and raw vocal delivery that you rarely get in animation. His voice doesn't belong here. I actually feel weirdly intimidated by his performance, because it sounds like someone in real life getting on my case. I like how the Simpsons make him so threatening to Bart, but he also has that sort of doofy and clueless way about him. Him grasping at straws, insisting Bart will steal stadiums and quarries and whatnot. And of course, his telephone call to The Simpsons, one of the all-time great screw the audience jokes. I know this is unfair, but this is one of those rare guest spots that gets even better by listening to the audio commentary. How intimidated Bill and Josh were by Lawrence Tierney in person, how ridiculously difficult he was being, how he wanted to do a southern accent for some reason. For that screw the audience joke, Tierney didn't get it and wouldn't do his lines. It reached the point where they literally wrote fake lines of Marge dialogue just to pacify him. I already like this joke, but every time I watch it, I think about idiotic pretend Julie Kavner dialogue thrown in. I feel bad that it was such a stupidly challenging recording for the producers that they really suffered for their art, but wow did they get a memorable performance out of it. Don Brodka has such a strong screen presence that he somehow upstages Phil Hartman's appearance. How many other guest stars have made Troy McClure a relative footnote in an episode's popularity? He is the perfect antagonist for this Bart POV story. I think Marge Be Not Proud's point of view is the strongest thing about it, to be honest, how perfectly it captures being a kid during the holidays. The Simpsons has done a lot of kids episodes that you could relate to at that age, but they're often rooted in some kind of wish fulfillment adventure or some kind of parable applicable to adults. But Bart's problems feel uniquely grounded and reminiscent, that childish feeling of wanting something on TV so very badly. How unfair your parents are being. That Bart would say, maybe if I stand next to the games looking sad, someone will feel sorry and buy me one. That is such a child's mentality of how things work. I'm surprised an adult came up with this line. The way they torture Bart in Act 1 is so well done. The realistic ways that the world teases him. Yeah, you could argue that the Milhouse thing doesn't make any sense, why he doesn't want to hang out. At the same time, kids can be kind of crappy, you know? Like someone gets the hot new thing and immediately gets super possessive and selfish about it. Once again, this episode gets at those dumb frustrations of being a kid. Really, Milhouse? You're gonna tattle to your mom? Really? I like that they picked a video game as Bart's object of desire, that they didn't go the more generic toy route like the fire truck. This way, they get that extra layer of observational humor, specifically setting the story right in the middle of Mortal Kombat mania. where kids are somehow bored by fighting a tank. How this radical, muscle-bound Santa will break in and demand, "Buy me Bone Storm or go to hell." This is exactly how Sega and Nintendo's ads were back then. And instead of doing old Atari and Pac-Man jokes, they have Mario, Luigi, Donkey Kong, and Sonic make cameos. This reference blew my mind when I was little. Everything about the video games here is perfect for this era. Also observing how expensive they were, paying $60 in 1990s money for just one game. How did our parents deal with it? Or going to some dinky independent place pre-Blockbuster and hoping to God they have a copy to rent. Even these video game display cases with the holes and stuff. I bet you that a large contingent of the Marge Be Not Proud fandom are total 90s kids. This thing is like Mayberry for older millennials. Gen Z, if you want to know what growing up in that decade was like, watch Marge Be Not Proud. All the video game stuff, rental stores, your family going to the big box department store, those VCRs hooked up to a giant wall of TVs, being all dressed up for that family photo. It hits a nice blend of specific 90s video game stuff and broader observations about retail as a whole. Look at this pile of mannequins in the back room, or how about that wood paneling in Don Brodka's office? God, the 70s were desperately trying to find a place to die. You can tell this is an Oakley and Weinstein era episode because they are the kings of charming observational humor. The downside is that Marge Be Not Proud ends up more dated than most Simpsons affairs, closer to a Homer Palooza than something evergreen like Lemon of Troy. Not everyone's going to care about all this stuff. That being said, even if the 90s video game nostalgia doesn't do it for you, the story concept is broad enough that most people can connect to it. This is fundamentally a relationship story, that deep-seated fear of disappointing your parents. This was actually based on a true story from writer Mike Scully's life, getting caught shoplifting as a child by security. But in Scully's case, his mom never found out about it. No wonder it's so good at capturing that childhood perspective. There's an authenticity to Bart's thought process and feelings of guilt, transporting us all back in time to our own similar experiences. That sense of authenticity pairs well with the novelty of the episode, that this is the first major Marge and Bart story. The Simpsons were finally doing another Christmas episode, and they made it extra special by exploring a brand new character dynamic. We spent so much time with Homer up to that point that we didn't fully understand the kids' dynamic with their mom, specifically Bart's. The episode does a great job establishing their relationship in Act 1, first with Bart's arguments in the kitchen, then with tuck-in time. Marge's quaint and out-of-touch perspective is played perfectly. I love the cutesy bedtime rhyme, how she proudly calls herself a big lame, how Marge goes straight for the old Forrest Gump quote to be relatable. God, I was sick of that box of chocolates back then. That was like the mid-90s version of doing Borat shtick. Bart's reaction is quite appropriate. It's cool how Marge gets to drive a lot of the action in this one. Homer is treated as the wacky sideshow character, popping in for a funny police academy joke before Bart is like, okay, back to the real story. Or Homer draws a funny sketch before Marge gets down to business. It's Marge who's telling Bart about their family photo plans. It's Marge stopping Bart on the stairs. When Don Brodka confronts them, it's Marge telling him he's full of it. Sidelining Homer was such a smart move for the story. His larger-than-life personality and relationship with Bart is going to muddle things. Homer can't be involved in this thing at all. The story makes sure to give Marge and Bart as much runway as possible. Hell, even Lisa doesn't really do anything here. They give her the kids' bathroom scene, where she gets to reframe the situation for everyone, but otherwise it's left to Bart to fix his own problems. Even though Marge is the key relationship of the story, they play it relatively cool with giving us her perspective. Initially, she gives an eerily numb response to Bart, not sure what to do with him. Then we get the painful echo of tuck-in time, a dagger to both Bart's heart and the audience's. The only insight we get is this scene, where Marge sadly observes that Bart's hand slipped away from her, and wonders if she mothered him too much. I really like their approach here, where we get this direct insight from Marge, but otherwise return to strictly telling the story from Bart's perspective. Him not being woken up by his mom, having to put his marshmallow in his hot cocoa. They could have taken a more balanced approach, tackling the parenting issue in closer detail, However, I think that runs the risk of too much moralizing, turning it into the very special episode that some accuse it of being. As is, it focuses more on comparing and contrasting Bart's changing attitude and relationships. They end up having to walk a careful line with Marge's characterization in the second half, where they have to show her change in parenting without it coming off as her giving up and not caring. There's an argument that Marge becomes too cold toward Bart, not bothering to wake him up and making a snow family without him. At the same time, she's still perfectly friendly with him, cheerfully handing him the box of marshmallows and suggesting he should still make a snowman. Also, with the Snow family, we don't know if this was just a problem with Bart being at Millhouse's when Homer and Lisa wanted to start. It makes some sense that Marge would be like, well, Bart was never into this cutesy stuff anyway. However, since the story follows Bart's perspective so closely, we the audience do feel that sting of being left out of family activities. Act 3 does a really nice job highlighting how these little changes in the family dynamic can mean a lot at such a young age. It's the little things, you know? A marshmallow can mean a lot to a kid. There's a beautiful sense of symmetry to the episode that is super satisfying. Scenes and plot beats in the first half will get a Bizarro World echo in the second. Bart steals something in Act 1, buys something in Act 3. Milhouse won't let Bart play Bone Storm in Act 1, is casually handing it over in Act 3. Mrs. Van Houten is kicking him out in Act 1, is awkwardly mailing cards with him in Act 3. Bart doesn't get Lee Carvalho's putting challenge in Act 1, does get it in Act 3. Okay, I guess Bart's attitude didn't change with this one, but it's still a hilarious callback. Structurally, there's a ton of clever tricks employed here. By the end, it does feel like everything has come full circle. From a jokes perspective, Marge Be Not Proud isn't necessarily one of the biggest laugh-out-loud gag fests ever. I already talked about all the charming observational humor about video games and retail. The humor is so aggressively character-driven here, with these extended conversations between Bart and Marge, or Bart and Don Brodka. I love this Homer speech about getting his electric football game. I think the joke writing is one of the main reasons why this episode has such a sitcom-y reputation. There are very few cutaway jokes, for example. Actually, not sure if there's a single one, now that I think about it. Most of the TV watching jokes are crammed into the very beginning and end. They don't really get a chance to do a wacky parody somewhere. In the audio commentary, they talked about putting in all these fantasy sequences into Act 2 just to inject some animated flair into this mundane adventure. It's not an especially bouncy episode, you know, which might be a big turnoff for some. Even still, you can't argue with the episode that gave us both Thrill Ho and Lee Carvalho's putting challenge. For my money, this is the best credits joke The Simpsons has ever done. I challenge you to find a better one. How can someone saying, "You have selected no," be so damn funny? Also, before I forget, a shout out to this Bart and Luann scene. It is so hilariously awkward, that mutual pause in their banter, and Bart saying, "Tell me I'm good." Then smash cutting to him walking home sadly. Perfect. Overall, Marge Be Not Proud is one of my all-time favorite Simpsons episodes ever. This episode rules. I watch it every year at Christmas. Yeah, it is indeed one of their more conventionally sitcom-y episodes by Simpson standards. That reputation is totally justified. At the same time, I don't think that's a bad thing. The Simpsons is an animated sitcom after all. James L. Brooks developed this show. It's gonna have one foot in that classic school of TV storytelling. Marge Be Not Proud, like all great Simpsons episodes, painted an accurate picture of the world around us while weaving a compelling story about our favorite characters. The reason why Marge Be Not Proud ultimately works is because the Marge and Bart relationship is the point of emphasis. That it sidesteps the shoplifting moralizing and understands that these two are really what we care about. Shoplifting, this inevitable Bart storyline, is just the inciting incident and a means to do funny jokes with Don Brodka and Troy McClure. Marge is such a loving and thoughtful parent that they need a legitimate crisis for her to react to. I love what Marge brings out in Bart's character, that he cares so much about disappointing her. I think Bart always subconsciously knew that about himself, the way he desperately covered up that TV. In a weird way, Marge is like Bart's soul. His whole worldly outlook seemed to change when he lost Marge. I just realized that similarity is probably why I love both of these episodes so much. Bart's arguably the most closed-off member of the Simpson family. I like when they give him a story that pushes him to his limit, puts him through the ringer, and thrusts some actual introspection upon him. Marge Be Not Proud hits that perfect balance for Bart's storylines, giving him that threatening external conflict, as well as that warm and mushy internal struggle. Also, Homer is in this episode. I get why this isn't everyone's cup of tea, because my god is this thing sugary sweet. But you know what? It's the holidays. We're allowed 20% extra sugar this month. I say, if you want something bitter and starchy, go watch Miracle on Evergreen Terrace instead.